But I don't think a lot of the people who were pushing Donald Trump to further engage in a war with Iran were concerned about that at all. What they want is regime change. They said it, by the way. They're saying it now. I mean, let's take them at their word.
So recently, Tucker Carlson was on the After Party podcast with Emily Jashinsky, and he talked about how only idiots wanted regime change in Iran, the consequences of that ordeal, the U.S. involvement in it, and whether that peace will hold. So let's take a look at what he has to say. Let's watch and react. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Now, Donald Trump posted on Truth Social at 6:02 p.m. that about 2 hours from actually right now, so around midnight East Coast time, Israel and Iran will enter a, quote, complete and total ceasefire. Now, Tucker, you recently predicted, and people are, of course, recirculating this now, quote, the first week of a war with Iran could easily kill thousands of Americans. It could also collapse our economy as surging oil prices trigger unmanageable inflation. Yes. Consider the effects of $30 gasoline, but the second week of the war could be even worse. End quote. Now, Ted Cruz is already taking a victory lap. He says, quote, it turns out that Tucker was wrong. I just wanted to get your thoughts on this, Tucker. Did Trump prove you and all of us who doubted the wisdom of this strike wrong tonight?
Well, you could ask Trump. I mean, was this fraught with like existential peril? Of course. I'm so grateful that he brought it in for a landing. I mean, I think we should be grateful to him. I think we should be grateful to God. I think we should understand how close we came. But I also think we should step back and ponder what we've learned. And what we've learned is who cares about the fortunes of the United States and who doesn't. And Ted Cruz doesn't, obviously. The people who acknowledge no risk at all because they were so focused on helping another country, like Ted Cruz, or like, you know, the many people who revealed themselves in the last 2 weeks, Mark Levin, chief among them, like those people should not have any access to power at all. Those people rolled the dice with your life and with the lives of your children. It's disgusting. And so, I mean, just ask yourself, is Mark Levin concerned at all about the United States, like at all? And the answer is no. Mark Levin is a repulsive ghoul whose entire sex life consists of watching other people get blown up.
He said it right, man. He said that this was fraught with peril, and it essentially was rolling the dice on our lives. And that's exactly what this is. This didn't have to happen. This killed innocent Israelis and Iranians just to prove that the Iranian regime didn't act in any way imaginable compared to the way that the neocons were selling it. In fact, they were remarkably restrained. And that's the biggest thing I have against this course of action, was Trump essentially put our futures in the hands of the Iranian regime, relying upon that they would act restrained. And thankfully, they did act restrained. And I'm glad Trump took that off-ramp at a time where neocons like Levin and Shapiro and others wanted regime change. You can see them, you know, melting down on Twitter and social media after this happened. But, you know, he is so right here to say this was fraught with peril. This did not have to happen. And all this has done is encourage the Iranian regime to acquire nukes now. Why wouldn't you? There's no disincentive now, especially considering this, considering what happened to Gaddafi, and considering how the U.S. looks at North Korea, a country that acquired nukes. You know, they used to talk about this as, you know, an existential threat, that the North Korean regime was part of the axis of evil. But overthrowing it's not really on the table now. So if I'm Iran, that's the lesson I learned. It's not to curtail my nuclear weapon program, that's for sure.
He was upset that there was a ceasefire and said so. How could you be upset with a ceasefire? How could you be upset that people are no longer dying? By the way, I think the ceasefire is real. We have no idea where anything goes in life. That's up to God. But as of right now, it's absolutely real, and we should be thankful for it. And so if your first instinct is this is bad, then you've just told us who you are. And look, that's between Mark Levin and God. And I think it's going to be a tough conversation. But for our purposes, you know, Mark Levin should not have access to power. I mean, he almost pushed the president of the United States into a path that would have destroyed the presidency and the United States and a lot of other countries too. So like a victory lap? Really? No, he was thwarted. John Podhoretz was thwarted. All the people who were thrilled by the direction this was going, Bill Kristol, you know, people who are avowed enemies of Donald Trump and are not at all interested in the United States, like they were stopped before getting what they wanted, which was regime change and military occupation of Iran. So like, you know, they can spin it, they're professional liars, so of course they're lying, but the facts tell a very different story. They didn't get what they wanted, and thank God they didn't.
Yeah, totally agree with them there. Well said by Tucker. And just to add some context to what he said about Mark Levin shouldn't be within any arm's length of power. He didn't say it in that exact words, but he's part of the Homeland Security Council, which really is offensive empire building council, if you ask me. That's what Mark Levin's part of. He's always been like that. He's one of the preeminent neocons. He had a famous conversation with Trump a few days before the strike happened, trying to prod him into regime change clearly. And, the people that surrounded Trump seemed torn on this. And I'm so glad this went away where it wasn't the worst catastrophic way. I still think it was a bad idea to even get involved in this whatsoever on behalf of Israel and tank your stated foreign policy aims from the U.S. to do it, because the U.S. wanted to negotiate with Iran. And then at some point, they decided to make a non-starter demand of Iran, which is no nuclear enrichment. Well, that was a poison pill that never would have gotten off the ground because they have a nuclear energy program. They can't shelve that. And we know that they didn't get the uranium in this strike. I'll let them celebrate it as a propaganda victory, I guess, if it subdues Netanyahu 2 weeks from now, drumming up this Iran threat for regime change again. But that's all the truth.
So why do you think the Mark Levins of the world didn't get what they wanted in this case, at least as of right now? Because the president just yesterday
Trump doesn't want nuclear war. I mean, as he said a million times, like, he doesn't want Iran to have the bomb because he doesn't want more bombs, because he's afraid of nuclear war, because he understands what it is. I've talked to him about this on and off camera many times, and he has, unique among world leaders, like an instinctive aversion to killing millions of people in seconds. And so,
well, that's great to hear. I'm a big Trump critic, but that's really great to hear, because it sure doesn't seem like many U.S. presidents have had that aversion, let me just say.
He's worried about nuclear war. It's the reason Tulsi Gabbard supported him. It's the reason they hate Tulsi Gabbard now, because she raises the very real specter of mass annihilation. And people like Mark Levin just don't care. They're nihilists, but they're hardly conservative. There's nothing conservative about rolling the dice on your country, starting a voluntary war. It's like freaking insane. And so, kudos, gratitude, and more to Donald Trump for stopping that. But it's not because he was following the advice of Mark Levin or Ted Cruz. I mean, these people are buffoons who, again, revealed their priorities. And those priorities have nothing to do with the United States. They were absolutely willing to destroy the United States, and including Donald Trump, for an objective that had nothing to do with the United States. And I think every honest person knows that. I mean, that's what we just learned. Like, under stress, you reveal who you really are. You show your real priorities, and they did.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. You really see where people come down on these issues over this recent catastrophe in Iran, this recent military excursion that was a war of choice, started by Israel, and then U.S. involvement started by Trump and the Trump administration. We see where people fell down on this. And we saw the people that moved the goalposts to, non-intervention and negotiate with Iran all the way up to regime change. We saw those goalpost moves all the way from those 2 points within about 72 hours, by the way. And he's totally right. This has catastrophic consequences, whether or not there was a ceasefire. I'm glad about that. It was a better route. It was a better alternative. But also it imperiled citizens. And this pushes Russia closer to China by any stretch of the imagination. And what are you going to think if you're Putin looking at this situation and Trump wants to negotiate peace in Ukraine? Do you think Putin will think Trump is a more trustworthy negotiator? I don't think so. And don't get me wrong, distrust among foreign countries toward the U.S. was at a high before this, but I don't think this gains us anything. If anything, I give the Iranian regime credit for acting restrained, not attacking U.S. soldiers, which would have brought upon, the ultimate impetus to stretch that war propaganda campaign one more step, and then give fuel to the fire of what cretins like Levin and Shapiro wanted in the form of regime change. John Bolton, too. He's melting down about it, too. That's pretty great.
And like, again, that's between them and God. But I think going forward, people like that cannot be allowed to steal the mantle of America first when America's interests are not first on their list of concerns. Like, not even close.
So I think you're the first person to ever use the words Mark Levin and sex life in the same sentence.
No, but
at least
and I'm not
publicly.
being mean. Look, it's clear that there are certain people, for whatever reason, it's connected to age. That's obvious. All the people who are most excited about killing seem to be old. I don't know any 35-year-olds who are really excited when people die, when there are videos of dead people on the internet. They don't get off on that. They're like, because they are living their lives. They are, in the truest sense, pro-life. But there is something about some older people, and I've always had great admiration and respect for older people. I was raised that way. I revered my father, for example, who lived to 84. But there is a category of older people that would include Rupert Murdoch. It would include Lindsey Graham, who turns 70 next month. It would definitely include Mark Levin, for whom, like, killing obviously provides some sort of deep emotional charge. And I don't mean to be glib and say it's sexual. I'm not like the Freudian here, but I mean, clearly you watch Mark Levin talk about killing people, and it's really dark, and it's certainly not something that any Christian can be comfortable with. Because
Yeah, it's just a dehumanization campaign. It's the same thing a lot of people say about, the anti-Semitic people out there, and, they want this race to be exterminated, but that's the mentality we actually see upon the people making those accusations much of the time, but in the direction of Iranians or Palestinians. We see this all the time. It's just projection. It's ghastly and it's dreadful. No, I don't want to see the extermination of anyone, especially on U.S. taxpayer money. That's abhorrent, and it always leads to negative consequences behind that very real human element, whether it be inflation and debt, inflaming tensions around the world, gaining new and improved enemies. All this empire building is such a scheme, and I just defer to what Pat Buchanan said, that you can't have a limited government world empire. You can either have a limited government or you can have a world empire. There is no third option between those. When you obtain one, you sacrifice the other. And I think the world empire is the worst choice here.
Christians are not for killing people, just period. Just to remind you, and I know that there are a lot of evangelicals who are like very excited to kill people. Check yourself for a second. Is Jesus's message we need to drop more bombs on people? Is that what you're arguing? I mean, I'm sorry to bring it to that, but I feel that I can say that as a deeply imperfect, flawed, ignorant Christian who's trying to understand the message of the religion. But I'm pretty certain it's not let's drop more bombs on people. And to see pastors saying that, that the neocons, many of whom are Jewish, get all the attack, all the hate or whatever, but it's not just them. There are a lot of evangelical ministers who are worse than Mark Levin, in my opinion. So
This is so true. There are so many Christians that support this nonsense and support endless aid to the modern Israeli state to commit these wars in particular. They think it's a good thing. Some people believe that this will hasten the arrival of Christ. I don't. I am a Christian, but I don't buy that at all. That's nonsense propaganda used to sell these wars, to, increase the propensity of Americans to embrace Zionism. And it really is a perversion of some of the teachings, the most basic teachings of my faith. So I agree with Tucker here entirely.
I just want to say that because it's true.
Yeah.
And I think they should measure what they're saying against the gospel. And it's like, is there alignment there? There's not. There's no alignment there.
Right.
What Mark Levin is already talking about, Iran needing to be pushed to sign a document of unconditional surrender. And I wanted to ask you about our friend Dave Smith's reaction to today's news as it was unfolding. He said, quote, even if the strikes, quote, did destroy a lot of equipment, the Iranians can rebuild and the regime will remain in power, now more incentivized than ever to get nuclear weapons. So two-part question for you here, Tucker. First, do you agree with Dave? I think I agree with Dave. And second point is, if that is true, then is Mark Levin not pushing us into a much more dangerous situation? And will that have sway with the president?
That's been the goal from the beginning. And all this stuff about Iran can't have nukes. I mean, Donald Trump believed that, for sure. He's been saying it for a decade. But I don't think a lot of the people who were pushing Donald Trump to further engage in a war with Iran were concerned about that at all. What they want is regime change. They said it, by the way. They're saying it now. I mean, let's take them at their word. They want regime change. Well, what does that mean? You don't change a regime by bombing it. There's no track record of success there.
Right.
You change a regime by killing the people who run it. And in the end, it's only kind of possible to steer that country in the direction you want by occupying it with people, which is to say troops. So they're arguing for a ground war with a country of 90 million people. And I know it's not interesting, the population of Iran, to Ted Cruz, because the details don't matter, because he doesn't care about the United States.
That's true. Ted Cruz in that interview made it a point to say, his mission when he got into Congress was to be the most pro-Israeli senator. So apparently being the most pro-American senator was just some afterthought. So I'm so glad Tucker is so red-pilled on this. He sees through the propaganda, because that's exactly what this is. I do believe Trump didn't want Iran to have nuclear weapons, and his first instinct was good. It was to negotiate with Iran. The same thing Obama did. And by the way, it's so rare on this channel, I'll give Obama a compliment, but the JCPOA was a good thing. It really alienated him from the Israel lobby to some extent. Of course, he did give Israel extra aid to compensate for how mad they were about that, but that is what curtailed their nuclear weapons program. And every document, even the deep state documents that show they were complying with this, acknowledge that. So it's the villains that wanted us to get into regime change instead, to take the pretext that they would have for war off the table. And that's what you saw here. So now, Iran, if I'm an Iranian, the lesson learned from all this is I need a nuke right now. This did not solve that. That didn't destroy the uranium. That seems to have been moved. And a lot of the tunnels where these bombs went to seem to have been empty. So, I think this is going to come up again. You're going to have Netanyahu clamoring for regime change again. The neocons will continue to do it. And we just have to remain hopeful that no president takes that next step, which thankfully Trump didn't do.
Obviously. But if you do care about the United States, you have to ask, okay, regime change, what does that mean exactly? What does that mean for us? How do we do that? How do you affect that? And the answer is by destroying your own country. So, let's start with, no, we're not doing that. Let's do everything we can short of that to get, the result that we want. But Levin, again, doesn't care about the United States. And they're all wearing the Trump skin suit right now because they think it suits their purposes. These are people who hated Trump. They're anti-Trump. They're never Trump. And that would include a lot of people on Fox News who I worked with for 15 years. I know what their political views are. They're my colleagues. They hate Trump. They hate him personally, they hate his agenda, they hate his economic views, and they really hate his foreign policy views.
Yeah, this is so true. Find me a 2016 Republican never-Trumper that was against this strike and that was against regime change and pushing it all the way to that point. They don't exist. They were getting behind Trump when he was, flirting with that and tweeting about regime change. Why shouldn't there be regime change? But it's clear now that their loyalty was just to the neocon foreign policy. It wasn't to Trump. They were trying to use Trump as a vehicle to get to that point by trying to drive a schism between the non-interventionists that happen to support Trump or are part of the greater MAGA coalition. So again, Tucker is exactly right about this.
Which in private they describe as insane and isolationist, he's a Nazi and all this stuff. I mean, they really have contempt for him. They kept him off the air at Fox News while I was there against my protests. So that's all true, and it's very frustrating as a literal person who cares about what's true to see people jumping up, Mark Levin or Laura Loomer, that's the world's creepiest human. I don't even know where she came from or who she is exactly, but she's running around. I'm Donald Trump's, defender. It's bizarre.
Champion.
Yeah, there was a, Defiant L's account or one of those Twitter accounts that posts hypocrisy tweets, one that says one thing and one that says another thing in a square graphic. And she had one where she said, Biden's weak or something because he's bombing Iran. We don't need these new wars. We don't need new interventions. And then just a few days ago, she tweeted something like, yeah, Trump is sticking it to the Iranian regime that chants death to America and wants to wipe Israel off the map. There was a really good one like that. So yeah, I share the contempt toward those views. I don't know her personally, but that is a ghastly mentality. It's a tribal mentality, and there's nothing different between that and, the liberals that oppose this right now, but when they're in power, they do the same thing. They said Biden showed incredible strength for confronting this existential threat. You know how the propaganda goes, and it works both ways in some regards. But it was good to see people like Matt Walsh and Steve Bannon and some other big Trump supporters really come out against this thing. The Hodge twins. I don't know if they're still supporting Trump yet, but a lot of that kind of movement, that kind of support base around Trump did come out strongly against this. And that was encouraging to see. Marjorie Taylor Greene, too, that might have been a bit of a surprise, but that one is good, too. She's been really good on foreign policy in general, by the way.
Champion. And I'm the arbiter of what it means to be for America, someone who, again, has no interest in the United States, demonstrated no interest. So I think it's just important. It's not a matter of score settling, and I don't care what Mark Levin does in his private life. I don't care what his opinions are. And Laura Loomer, I'm not even really sure who she is. However, if people like that are able to take over a political movement whose stated goal is to serve the United States, first and foremost, America first, make America great again, if those people can take control of that political movement, first of all, it's an offense against reality and truth, but second, it's really dangerous for the country. I mean, they washed out of the Democratic Party, the same people, and now they're trying to take over the Republican Party. How about no? Unbroken track record of failure, unbroken track record of ideas that hurt the United States in measurable ways, impoverished the United States, put us in unpayable debt, killed a ton of people, destabilized the world, caused a refugee crisis in Europe, destroyed Europe. That's a lot of destruction for one group of people and one set of really bad ideas, the John Boltons, the Bill Kristols.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so refreshing to see this being openly talked about, how destructive that is. We're 10 years removed now from Trump on the debate stage in South Carolina saying that the Iraq War was a disaster. Saddam didn't have weapons of mass destruction. It was a total failure. It was humiliating. He said that on the debate stage in front of Jeb Bush, when Jeb Bush, believe it or not, was considered the front runner in that race. And since then, that the Republican Party has been split between those mentalities of the interventionist mentality and the non-interventionist mentality. Some of those ghoulish figures like, Crystal and such have gone over to essentially just support the Democrats. And, but this mentality is openly talked about. The non-interventionist foreign policy is openly broadcasted on the new media. That's super refreshing. How far that's come. However, the Democratic Party went the opposite way, I think, as soon as Barack Obama swore in. Much of his support base, I dare say most of it, had no problem with the drone wars, the Libya intervention, the Syria intervention, exacerbating the Afghanistan war at times. So, yeah, that's where we're at.
Can they be allowed to take over the Trump White House? No. How about no? Just as an American. I mean, I don't really care what people think of me at this point. I'm 56. You were wrong. Well, I've been wrong many, many times. I'll be wrong many, many more times. But the one thing.
Me too. If you can believe this, I supported this foreign policy neocon madness back in 2003. It's not a proud moment, and I was wrong about that. I was a young 20-year-old. That's my best defense against it. But I bought this stuff, so. Yeah, I've been wrong too, but thankfully life is such that we can take lessons from the past, learn from them, and try to avoid the insanity in the future.
I am as sincere. I really mean it. I don't care about the effect on me. I don't want to relive Iraq. And I know the people who did it. I lived among them. Yeah. I defended it. I repeated their talking points. Not doing that again. And we came really close to doing that again because of Mark Levin and Laura Loomer and the rest of these morons who've never even left New Jersey. Like, they don't know anything about the world. That's the other thing. They're dumb. They don't know. Not only they don't know the population of Iran, they don't know anything. They don't know the nations that border it. They just don't know anything.
I love it when Tucker takes the gloves off, man, and he never does it to the extent that he cares about foreign policy, and that's great to see. He's really fired up about this, and that's something that I just adore about him. I don't share his beliefs in many other regards, especially in terms of trade and stuff. But man, does he articulate our layman-focused foreign policy views in a way that few others do. So cheers to Tucker on that.
And I'm not making an argument for expertise or having been there, but I am making an argument for being responsible when you demand that the U.S. military do certain things. Okay, then tell me what happens next. They can't. Because
you've never been to the crossings.
Again, they don't care. No,
it's like
no
we're
mas.
playing,
enough of them.
It's like we're playing Tucker's enemies bingo. Like we're
well, I'm sorry to be that way, and it's not. I mean, I've never attacked Mark Levin. I've never attacked that crazy person whose name I just used a couple of times. Probably shouldn't have. But all I'm saying is This is really sinister. It's really bad. And because we were just in a crisis for a week, we saw who people are. We saw what they cared about. And
Yes.
I've got nothing against Ted Cruz personally. I feel sorry for Ted Cruz, obviously a totally hollow person taking instructions. But I do think we learned that this is not someone who should be influencing wars, because he just doesn't know anything, he doesn't care, and he's not putting America's interests anywhere near the top of his priorities. And that's, that, like, we saw that. It's on tape.
Yeah, he basically said as much. It's AIPAC and Israel and the military-industrial complex. That's where Ted Cruz's priorities lie. He can call himself a hawkish non-interventionist all he wanted, but he's an interventionist. He's cut from the neocon cloth. It's really hard to deny that at this point.
And it's kind of hard to unsee it. So this is the moment to just draw a line and say, we can have all kinds of disagreements, and I'm sure that we will, over all kinds of things, including wars. But if you've shown that you just don't care what happens to the United States, if you're one of the people who said, the people in Gaza are so dangerous that they have to be expelled from Gaza, and by the way, maybe we should move them to the U.S., people said that. I think Ben Shapiro said that. If you are telling me that the people who live in Gaza are so evil that they can't live where they were born, they have to move somewhere else, and oh, by the way, they should move to my country, what are you saying? You're saying that your country is a trash can into which we can throw our refuse. And that's their attitude. And as an American, I was born here, I'm going to die here. I just want to raise my voice and say, no, you can't treat my country with that level of contempt.
Have you spoken to the president since last week?
Yeah, I have, actually.
Okay. And on that note, are you afraid going forward that there's still significant room for, we keep using Mark Levin, I'm really using it as a stand-in for a group of people that include Lindsey Graham, that include John Bolton, for that wing of the Republican Party, the broader conservative movement, to still have significant input over policy in the Middle East, but particularly Iran?
Am I concerned that, like, normal people will have input, or am I concerned? The normal people won.
Right.
Again, it's not even ideological. I've got all kinds of theories about all kinds of things. Some of them are stupid, probably. But it's not even about, like, what your worldview is. It's just super simple. I live here. My 4 kids live here. I hope to have grandchildren here. The country's got a ton of problems. I think the government should focus on those problems first and foremost.
Seems simple, but a lot of people sure seem to object to that, and certainly the Israeli lobby and the military-industrial complex and all the neocons that seem to prioritize these foreign wars above domestic concerns. And that's what he's speaking to. Totally agree. I don't even agree with the same prognostication when it comes to addressing those domestic concerns compared to a lot of people that are also anti-war activists. But still, that should be the priority. I would much rather prioritize that, even if it goes against my domestic policy views, than prioritizing these endless wars, because that ends up with domestic catastrophes anyways. We see how it created the Patriot Act and the surveillance state and the DHS and debt and inflation and curtailments of our civil liberties in so many regards.
Not other people's problems. Doesn't mean I'm not an isolationist. I shouldn't ignore the world. I've been all around, though. I've been to, like, every country in the world, practically. I've been everywhere. I'm really interested in the world. I don't hardly want to be isolated, of course. Mark Levin never gets out of his studio. You're an isolationist. Okay. No, I'm not an isolationist. I'm not arguing that. I'm just saying that as a father treats his family, a president and a government should treat their country, which is put the country first. That's it. Your first concern. Doesn't mean I don't care about my neighbor's kids. I do. I love my neighbor's kids. But I love my kids most because they're my kids. Yeah. That's all I'm saying. And show that you mean it by acting that way. And so you should be a lot more upset with the Mexican drug cartels, which kill people I know in my town, including recently, than you are with the mullahs in Iran. That's not a defense of the mullahs in Iran. I'm not pro-mullah at all. But like, from my perspective as an American, I'm a lot more afraid of the drug cartels than I am of the mullahs.
Yeah, the whole anti-mullah campaign sure seems to be a propaganda campaign, and that's what we saw in this foray into foreign policy. Just the latest blunder of the military establishment and the war machine here. I'm glad that the off-ramp was taken, and Trump does deserve some credit for that, certainly, as people like Levin and Shapiro and Bill Kristol and all these ghouls were promoting regime change, and some of them were actually in Trump's ear. We know that he talked to Levin shortly for this, so props to him for taking that off-ramp, but he did roll the dice of our lives when it came to relying upon Iranian restraint to do that, because we were this close to regime change there. If Iran would have done some damage, and they had the capability of doing that, to United States servicemen in that region, and there were about 45,000, including contractors, just off the southwest coast of Iran, in Bahrain and Qatar and areas like that, this really could have come close to catastrophe. And for what? Killing innocents over this fruitless bombing campaign, this stupid strike from Israel to draw us into this? And Trump, deserves some criticism too for allowing the U.S. even to be drawn into this. For a while, we heard the propaganda line that Israel's just doing this on their own, even though, of course, the U.S. was funding Israel. They give them the bombs and the intelligence, etc. We're tied at the hip with Israel. There's no getting around that until you sever those ties, which I promote. But this really has long-term negative consequences. And Tucker spoke to many of those here. One of them was that Iran is now incentivized to gain a nuclear bomb. Why wouldn't you? Again, why wouldn't you? I know that there's news out there that the Ayatollah Khamenei has issued a fatwa against nuclear weapons, but what if he now changes his mind, or his successor changes his mind? If I was his successor, I would change my mind if I was running that regime. Again, the people that support these wars and regime change also have corresponding propaganda all the time. They say that it's the death to America chants that really threaten America, that chants are going to overthrow us. That's essentially saying words are violence, the same thing they criticize liberals for doing. And there's always this drumbeat up to war with goalpost changes, all to support this end game of regime change that Netanyahu's always wanted. The neocons have always wanted it. We know that from the clean break memo that Wesley Clark talked about as early as 1996, as late as 1996. That was known that they wanted to overthrow the Iranian regime. Netanyahu doesn't dance around this. He said he wanted the Libya model to apply there, which was referencing a regime change operation in Libya. So Tucker's exactly right, and Emily did a great job here. Please subscribe to her too. She has a great podcast, really good interviews, and asks really good questions. So make sure to subscribe to her. I'll put a link in the description on that. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel. Consider becoming a YouTube member or Patreon patron to support the channel, and I'd really appreciate that. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. I'll catch you in the next one.